Hello everyone, thanks for joining us for our webinar on moving to France and buying a French property. My name is Karen Tate, I'll be your host for the next hour. I'm a freelance journalist. For the past 20 odd years I have been editing French Property News magazine, and I also contribute to titles such as the Sunday Times in the UK. I'm joined today by our panel of experts, but you may notice we have two fewer than on your screen. Unfortunately, Peter of Spectrum IFA, he has had to take his son to the hospital, so he can't join us. And Paulette of AXA Insurance, she is trying to join us but has some technical problems, so hopefully we'll see her at some point during the webinar. If not, Tracy will be answering some of her questions. So as I say, joined today by our panel of experts. I'll hand over to them to introduce themselves before we get started on the questions. So Lisa, would you like to start?
Yes, thanks, Karen. I'm Lisa Green. I've been working with LEGGETT IMMOBILIER for nearly 20 years. Obviously, it's a French estate agency, a company specialising in selling French property. The company's achieved amazing things over the decades and particularly strives to deliver excellent customer service. We describe it as an Anglo-Saxon approach. We don't just strive, we do succeed. LEGGETT's already a major force in French real estate, but with our new partnership with Hamptons International, we're offering even more. We've got 7,500 properties across France and almost 150,000 homes worldwide, which means obviously more choice for buyers, more exposure for sellers, but we're still the same trusted, friendly business at heart, very approachable, very happy to help. There are hundreds of LEGGETT agents all over France, all of them living and working in the areas, visiting all of the properties. Every property that we have listed on our site, we have been to see, and we will accompany your viewings, etc., etc. So it's an estate agency, but with a very high level of service and involvement to our clients.
That's great, thanks Lisa. And Tracy?
Hi, good evening everybody. My name is Tracy Leonetti. I'm a relocation expert based in the south of France for the past almost 35 years now. And our job at LBS is really to help you move, live or create a business in France. We do this by helping you step by step with all of those paperwork processes. And of course, I'm here this evening to help you answer any questions on those processes.
Lovely, thank you, Tracy. We're just having a little bit of feedback on your sound there, so maybe you just want to make sure your speaker and your microphone are clear. Over to Sharon.
Thanks, Karen. I'm Sharon Revol. I'm a French mortgage broker. I've been working in French mortgages for the last 22 years, and I look after the international team at market leader CAFI. We're a whole of market broker specialised in arranging mortgages in France, and I specialise in non-resident expat clients.
Lovely, thanks Sharon. And finally, last but not least, Jonathan.
Good evening, Karen. Good evening, panelists. Good evening to our audience. Yes, my name's Jonathan. I'm an employee for Lumon. I'm a senior executive dealer. I've been here 15 years of our 25 years of trading. We're celebrating our quarter of a century this year. And last year we were trusted to handle over £7 billion worth of currency for our clients. So essentially we're here to help with moving money in and out of France, not just for the purchase, but for living costs and beyond. So in my years, there's not many situations I've not covered in the French property transaction process. And as well as a real interest in France and the lifestyle over there, I'm also very interested in the FX markets and exchange rates. So one of the things I like to do in these webinars is just to find out a little bit more about you, our audience. So if you can please answer a poll that you should now see on your screen, just relating to when you might be planning on looking at property over in France. So it's just helpful for us to get information regarding you, the audience, and where you might be with potential transactions. As you'll probably be aware, buying a property doesn't happen overnight. The first step in the process is obviously to go out on those viewings and start that ball rolling. And then once offers have been accepted, we can be looking at a good sort of 2 to 3 months towards a completion. So there is certainly a time frame that you'll be working to in that process. So thank you very much, everyone who's answered those polls. Lots of people going out perhaps early into the new year. So now really is a good time to be looking at properties. I'm now going to ask you another poll, please, audience, just regarding when you might financially be in a position to put forward an offer. This is certainly where the foreign exchange element that Lumen is, of course, concerned with becomes very important. As we mentioned, that whole buying process, we can be looking at a good 3 months from sort of start to finish, potentially longer. Now, exchange rates are changing on a daily basis, so Lumen offers a number of options to help lock in exchange rates in advance and target particular rates. We'll come on in the webinar to some more information regarding those options, but it is important to understand that, and it's very helpful for us to know where in that buying process you might be. So thank you very much, everyone who's answered that poll. And then the final poll, please, our audience, is just where you're joining us from. Of course, wherever you're joining us from in the world, that won't alter the French buying process. That's going to be exactly the same, but there can be slight nuances for us to consider. I'm seeing a lot of people joining us from the UK today, and lots from America as well. We do see a lot of our audience from there, but also wider Europe and some in France as well. So thank you very much, everyone who's voted in those polls. It's really useful. And I'll pass back to Karen. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan, and thank you everyone for answering those polls. So let's get started on our questions. The first question is a buying one for Lisa. Catherine Sugden says, I've seen a property I want to buy from you, but I'm unsure of how to proceed and what is involved. And Lee McCoy also says, we would like to understand the whole process of purchasing in France. So perhaps you could give an overview of the buying process, what people can expect.
Yes, obviously it's quite a big answer. I'll try and make it as succinct as possible. Identifying your property. We still have a lot of people who are buying properties without having physically visited them because they can feel so reassured by videos and WhatsApp viewings, FaceTime viewings, etc. Which leads me to the cornerstone of what everybody should be seeking to establish, which is transparency from both sides. Obviously, ideally, if you can visit the property, if you know you like the area, depending on why you're buying it, if it's a holiday home, you're going to feel less sensitive about really, do I absolutely want to live in this area every single day, than if it's a permanent home. You know, you need to perhaps identify if there are schools, hospitals, etc., etc. So there's all of that selection of your property process to start with. Then, as I say, you move on to transparency. So from your side of things, as a buyer, you need to be transparent about your situation. Are you in a proceedable situation? Have you sold a property? Do you have the cash? Have you already spoken to Lumon? Have you got your rates booked in? Have you already spoken to Sharon? Do you have some idea about a mortgage? If it's going to be a permanent home, have you spoken to Tracy? Do you know that you can definitely move there, live there? Almost anyone can buy a property in France. There are very few countries on a blacklist where people who are from there cannot buy from. So for Brits, Americans, Europeans, etc., it's all fine. Anyone can buy a property, but not necessarily anybody can live there on a permanent basis. So make sure you're properly informed about that. Transparency from the agent side or the vendor side involves them telling you exactly what the property is like, verbally or actually pointing things out to you on viewings, and via a full set of what's called diagnostics of the property, where it's tested for electrical safety, presence of asbestos, presence of lead, etc., etc. So all of those documents, that the diagnostic tests, which would usually run to around 100 pages, will be given to you as the buyer, and you will definitely see all of those before you sign a contract, any kind of contract, and ideally, obviously, would see all of those before you make any kind of offer. So, as I say, transparency is absolutely key. So you know that when you do make your offer, you know what it includes. So, for instance, if the property needs a new septic tank, the vendor may say, well, I know that it does, and that's going to cost around this. and I've already factored that into my asking price. And as a buyer, you make your offer including what you want it to include. So you may say, you've said that it was a holiday home for you, Mr. Vendor, and it's going to be a holiday home for me. So can I have the furniture? Can I have the lawnmower, etc.? Make the offer as transparent and all-inclusive as possible from both sides. And you can also include timescale on that as well, because the normal timescale for a transaction is 3 months, but by mutual agreement, it can be a little longer if it suits everyone. If you need to wrap up some business somewhere else, or you need to free up some funds, you can say, well, does it suit if it takes 5 months, 6 months, a year, whatever? That, subject to negotiation, is something that can vary. So once you've got all of that boxed off, you know exactly what you're buying, they've seen your offer, they know how you're funding it, and it's accepted, that's when you would move to a pre-contract, which is usually a compromis de vente, sometimes a promesse de vente. They're both pre-contracts that people enter into, and they're very much like, for a UK client who will understand the process in the UK, exchange of contracts. So it's quite binding at that stage, subject to a 10-day cooling off period where you have the opportunity to reflect, period of reflection, that you've signed this contract, are you going to go ahead with it? And at the end of that 10-day cooling off period, that's when the contract starts to become more binding, and you would normally be lodging your deposit, which is possibly 5 or 10% of the value of the property, or a fixed amount, but 10% is the most usual. There's also a clause, a penalty clause, if you pull out of the contract after that point for no good reason. So if you do sign a pre-contract and you don't pull out in cooling off, and you're really not sure, then that's not a good situation to be in. You need to be sure. Again, part of the transparency of the process is, you know, when you make your offer, it is, you know, if this offer is accepted, I am going to go through with this purchase. It's not just sort of casting out your net to say, I wonder what I could get this house for, I wonder what I could get that house for. You know, let the agent and or the vendor know that, you know, this is actually an offer, or this is just testing the water. So after cooling off has passed, the only time that the contract would then not go ahead is if one of what's called a suspensive clause is not met. So a clause suspensive, a clause that's put into the contract, again by mutual agreement, could be for finance, for obtaining finance, a mortgage. It could be subject to planning permission for something like putting in a swimming pool. It has to be something that's achievable and black and white. It can't be something nebulous, like if my wealthy auntie dies and I'm lucky enough to get the money before I'm due to sign, then, and if I don't, I'm released. You know, it has to be something specific. And again, transparent. You know, the vendor has to know that you've got that clause there, because if it's not met, they're straight back to square one as well. And during the 3-month period that I mentioned, or longer if you've negotiated it, that's when the notaire does all of their searches and conveyancing, and you as a buyer would organise your insurance to be put into place from when you have the property, maybe line up some builders or other artisans to do some work on the property, and subject to the notaire's searches all being okay, then you'll go to the notaire's office, sign the acte de vente, which is, you know, the final deed of sale when the property becomes yours. You have to have all of the money there for that day. It has to be all cleared funds. So it's a really important date to have all of your ducks in a row for that day and make sure the funds are there. Similarly with mortgage funds, because that's a bit of a roller coaster of getting the funds there on time, that Sharon can perhaps explain if people would like to know more about that. And when you leave the notaire's office, having signed the acte de vente, then you are the owner of the property. You'll be given the keys. You can go straight to the house. The vendors obviously have to have quit the property and got all of their belongings out of it, and it's your home, free to enjoy. Karen, I think you might be muted.
Time to celebrate, I said. Pop that bottle of champagne and celebrate your new property. Thanks very much, Lisa. That was very comprehensive. Hopefully that's put people's minds at rest. We've got a couple of questions here for Tracy concerning the S1 form. Peter Ben says, if I move before my state retirement age of 67, can I still get a UK S1 form when I reach that age? And Marissa Mann says, when should I apply for my S1 and visa once I exchange in the UK?
Okay, so two very good questions. So the first one about the S1, absolutely. So if you move, obviously on your visa to France, you go through the visa process and you don't have an S1, you'll need to have private insurance, of course. But you can absolutely come without your S1. And then once you are in France and you are of retirement age in receipt of state pension, then you can request your S1. And then if you're already in the French healthcare system, make sure you hand that through to the CPAM so they can update your file. That but it absolutely can be done after the agreement is in place that the S1 you can request even if you're already living in France. So that's not a problem. So the second question was more about when you should apply for your S1 and visa. So your S1 should be applied for when you know you are moving to France and you have an address in France. So very much aligned with your visa. Your visa process can take anything from 2 to 3 months, and you need to have an address in France for that. So for the S1, you need to reach out to the Department of Health and Pensions, and I would advise reaching out from the moment that your project is very solid, because they're going to ask you, what are they going to ask you? They're going to ask you whereabouts in France, so they're asking you for your French address, what date you're moving, your national insurance number. They'll ask you from what date you're receiving state pension. So you have to have a solid plan. And really can reach out by email or by telephone, because what will happen is once you've got that S1 in process, when you go for your visa meeting, you need to prove your S1 is in process, and then you won't need to get private insurance for that. So that's important to time it with your visa application. So I would suggest, at least a few months before you move into France, start working on your visa file and your S1 at the same time. And then you can show your notification of pension at your visa meeting as well, so then you won't have to pay for private insurance. Is that linked to the sale or the signature of your property in the UK? Of course, because you can quite easily, it depends if you need to sell your property in the UK to buy the property in France. So, some people don't necessarily need to sell to buy, other people do. So, the signature of your contract in the UK may be dependent on your signature in France, in which case, yes, then that could have an impact as when you apply for your visa and when you apply for your S1. So for me, I do an abstraction from that. I would suggest reaching out for your S1 and your visa would be very much in alignment from when you move into France, and probably that would be 2 to 3 months before you move in. I'm not sure if that's covered the whole question, Karen, because it's a bit of a complicated on the second part, but hopefully, yes.
I think it has, but it might just be worth explaining very briefly what the S1 is for people who aren't aware.
Absolutely, yes. So the S1 is a really important document, because what it really is, it's the portability of your healthcare. Really what it means is anybody who's moving to France who is in receipt of state pension has the access to an S1, and they request that from the Department of Health and Pensions. And really what it means is it's the UK or any other European country that is paying for your healthcare behind the scenes. So that doesn't affect what access to healthcare you get. So whether you've got an S1 or you don't, you get the same level of service, the same reimbursement level. It just means that the UK is paying for it, and therefore, it is better from a social contributions perspective. So when you do your tax declaration in France, there's a box you tick, and so you pay less cotizations or less social charges because you're an S1 holder, because the healthcare costs are being covered by your country of origin. So very important from a social contributions perspective, so it impacts your tax. And very also important, the second point to mention on that is, if you come to France without an S1, you have to wait 3 months before you can access the French healthcare system. If you come to France with an S1, you can access it on day one. So you can actually make the application from the moment you're in France. So you don't have that 3-month carence, as they call it in France.
That's great, thanks. And of course, the S1 is just applies to UK residents. In actual fact, we did just get a question in for Paulette, which was from Camilla Rosenberg in the US. And she's saying, being Swedish and American, can I get a carte vitale immediately, or does it take time? You just touched on it then, so perhaps you could quickly answer that one as well.
Absolutely. So access to getting a carte vitale, it doesn't matter what nationality you are. What's important is that you have the legal right to be in France, of course, so you have the appropriate visa to be in France, be you American, Swedish, British, whatever nationality. If you move to France legally with the appropriate visa, you get access to the French healthcare system. Does it give you access to a carte vitale immediately? No. A carte vitale is basically a card that facilitates the reimbursement system. It doesn't give you access to the healthcare system. What gives you access to the healthcare system is your social security number. So access to the French healthcare system via getting a social security number first, and then a carte vitale is what is the process to go through. And it takes, I would suggest it takes about 6 months to get your social security number, anything between 4 and 6 months to get your social security number. And then your carte vitale comes after that, which can take another 6 months. It really depends on what your situation is, how good the documents are that you provide, how quickly you are at responding to the never-ending messages you will get from them. So no, it's not immediate. It does take its time. It's not about your nationality. It's really about having the right legal in making the application.
Lovely, thanks Tracy. And of course, you can only have a carte vitale when you move to France. You don't get that if you just have a holiday home. Then you need insurance and
it's only for residents, secondary residents. Yes.
Yeah. Okay then, lovely. Question for Sharon now. Camille Docco, who's joining us from Australia, she wants information on getting a loan as a non-resident.
Thanks, Karen. Well, it's possible to get a mortgage, a property finance loan, even if you're based in Australia. It's a long way away, but it's not an obstacle. Everything can be done normally at a distance, and you do need to meet the French lending criteria in terms of borrowing, even though you're a non-resident. So the basics of French mortgage lending is that mortgage lending here is based on affordability of the mortgage. The French lenders will look at your taxable income and they will look at your debt-related outgoings. The long and short is that your debt-related outgoings, so existing mortgage commitments, credit card commitments, loans, rent, anything that has a kind of permanent financial commitment, contractual, is no more than 35% of your debt-to-income ratio. The calculations are a little bit more complicated than as I've just said, because it can depend on your situation, whether you're salaried, self-employed, whether you have bonuses, how long you've been in your job. So all of the different variables that could happen with your income, we have to take them into consideration, and the criteria can change from bank to bank. You will need to put down a personal contribution towards the purchase. So for somebody who's based in Australia, that's normally around 20 to 30% of the property price, excluding all of the purchase fees. It's important to note that also the bank carry out a valuation on the property, and that can affect the value that they're able to lend to you as well. Banks will also look at how much savings and how much leftover income you have once you purchase, because they have a legal obligation to make sure that the mortgage is affordable to you. So they're not going to they can't let you put all of your savings into the project. You have to have some savings left over to be able to deal with emergencies, if you lose your job, if you're faced with illness, etc. Talking about illness, the majority of banks require that you have life insurance cover with the mortgage, and that the mortgage is paid off by the age 75. So if you're 50, the maximum duration would be, say, 25 years. It's quite complex, the process. We can do a pre-qualification beforehand. However, only the banks can give the final agreement on the mortgage. And conditions can vary from bank to bank. With the current global economical and political situation, that we can also find ourselves confronted sudden changes in lending criteria based in France. To give the example, recently, not so affected in Australia, but American, with, for example, Trump's tariff, etc. Lenders were a little less willing to lend because of more risk associated in their exposure in these markets. So it's a good idea to speak to a broker beforehand, and it is quite a complex process to get a mortgage. But we're happy to help.
Thanks, Sharon. So let's have a currency question for Jonathan now. Samantha West says, what is the benefit of using a currency company? Do they charge a fee?
Thank you, Karen. So benefits of dealing with a currency company. The number one thing is exchange rates. We can demonstrate savings over the banks. The bank is the typical place a lot of people will think of when they come to move their money around. And so we can demonstrate savings over the banks. We've got 4.8, 4.9 sometimes out of 5 on Trustpilot, thousands of reviews, lots of people extremely happy with the rates that we can offer. So that's the sort of fundamental reason. We do a sort of mystery shopper every so often, looking at some of the rates the banks are offering versus what we can offer. And, you know, there's fluctuation between what some of the different banks out there are offering. Savings historically we've seen can be 1 to 2 cents. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. We'll certainly be open to a comparison with anyone who's interested. Now, the exchange rate is the main thing, but it's really the service. And I don't just mean a sort of polite and responsive and helpful sort of service, but some of the products and options that we can offer, some of the benefits to you if you're buying property over in France. So these include different contracts. Now, I touched on some of these earlier. I've mentioned you have a contract called a forward contract. So if you just had your offer accepted in France, let's say you've got to buy 200,000 euros over the course of the next 2 months, well, 3 months, let's say, typical window there. Who knows what the rates are going to do in that 3 months? Now, you might not have all the money available. You might be selling a property in the US, selling a property in the UK, wherever your money is coming from. You can use a forward contract to fix the rate in advance. So let's just say that offer was accepted today. Obviously, we're in September. You're expecting to complete in December. UK-US sale is going through in November. It could make it very difficult. It could be stressful if all of a sudden the rates are moving around a bit as they have. So this forward contract allows you to fix the rate in advance, peace of mind and certainty of the rate. There's other contract options as well, where you can target a higher rate. So if you're a bit of a gambler, you're sort of a bit more speculative, you're hoping that the rates are going to go up for you, then we can pinpoint a rates for you and automatically buy if the market suddenly gets there. There's lots of other benefits of us. We have a Euro wallet that you can use. Opening a bank account in France isn't always totally straightforward. We do have some banking partners we can introduce you to help speed that process along. But in the very early stages, once you've had that offer accepted, we can offer a Euro. It's not technically your own bank account, it's a segregated client account. In America, we'll call it an escrow account, a client account, but you can buy euros and hold them with Lumon, and then we can pay direct to the notaire. We work with many of the notaires that LEGGETT work with, so we know the money in and out system over in France very easily, and using this wallet can really streamline it. So very difficult to fit into just a few minutes, all the wonderful benefits of dealing with Lumon, aside from just talking to myself. I've done this 15 years, some of my colleagues have done it over 20 years, and whilst a lot has changed in the world in 20 years, actually the fundamental process of certainly buying in France and property transactions hasn't changed, and the drivers in the currency market haven't changed either. So yeah, we can have a good discussion of your situation, a bit of expertise there to help ensure it goes through smoothly. The question did also ask about charges. There's no sort of additional fees, costs or charges. How we make money is on the difference between a buying and a selling rate, but there's no fee for registration. It's all free of charge. When we do a trade, we'll quote a final price to you, but there's nothing additional on top of that. It's really transparent, and then it's up to you whether you want to go ahead. So I hope that answers the question. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Jonathan. So another question for Lisa now. Win-Win Tan in the USA says, what region is best for a single older woman? And Darren Shred in the UK says, I'm now in a position to move on a property purchase, but can't settle on a location. Is it just a case of more trips to learn regions? Well, France is a big country with a lot of very different regions in terms of gastronomy, culture, landscapes, everything else. That's a very difficult question, but perhaps you can give Win-Win and Darren a few tips on how to sort of narrow down a location, choose where to buy.
Well, for Darren particularly, and anyone who's in his situation, who's trying to sort of identify a region, I think climate has to be a massive factor to consider. You know, do you want a temperate climate? Are you seeking somewhere really, really sunny? You know, can you bear it if temperatures keep increasing and it's much hotter in summer? Is that something that you're just thinking will bring it on, or you think, no, I'm not quite so sure? Do you want to be near the coast? I always assume everybody loves the seaside, because I do, but in fact I have learned over the years that lots of clients just aren't that interested by the coast, but you pay a premium for being at the coast. So climate, coast, or mountains or lakes, you know, do you want to be able to go skiing? If you map out all of those things for yourself and then overlay transport links, are you going to need to travel back to your country of origin? If you're relocating to France, are you going to need to get back? How often? How difficult is that going to be for you if you choose somewhere that's nowhere near an airport or a port? Are you going to have family visiting you? How easy do you want it to be for them? So all of those factors really help to sort of broad brushstroke identify places on a map. And then you can obviously start to drill down into property prices, because there are lots of micro markets in France. They are quite affected by commutability into a town. So the closer you are to a town centre, i.e. work and great schools, the more a property is going to cost. So if it's not quite so important for you to be there near town, then obviously you can possibly go to a more rural location and get more for your money. And that's when land and possibly if you want to have animals, horses, etc., come into play as well. So all of those things are to do with where, which region and where. And agents will usually take you more seriously and have more time to invest in helping you with your search if you've tied down where you want to be. If you go to an agent and you say, I want to move to France, they are like, well, it's a big country, as Karen started out with saying. Can you be a little more specific? Leggett have a sales support team who are based at their head office, who are on the phone and email with people, and they can help you with general searches and finding properties, making itineraries, etc. So they can give you lots of general assistance if you haven't tied down a region. But if you want to actually be getting face-to-face with agents and seeing properties, it does help if you are a little bit more sure about the fact that, you know, this region is for you. And to go back to, was it Win-Win's question about where should a single female be moving to? France generally is obviously an extremely safe and polite and civilized country, and, you know, old school civilized, sort of bonjouring everyone in the street and so on. But it's as wide an answer as the mix of humans that are out there. You know, what level of French do you have? How much time do you want to spend speaking with your neighbours? Do you need access to public transport, or can you drive? So all of the other things that we were talking about for the general search, plus all of the sort of day-to-day lifestyle things. I always say to people that when you're moving to France, if you're going rural, for example, you know, expect it all to be notched up by many times more rural than the UK, for example. You know, village life in the UK can still perhaps be quite busy, have a buzz, there might be a pub, whereas village life in France can be, you know, the boulangerie is open in the morning 4 days a week and that's it. If you don't have children here, you're not going to sort of build up that lifelong pattern of knowing people by sending kids to school. So you're going to have to either be quite insular and not want to mix with people, or put yourself out to go to the third age club, troisième âge, or join clubs for sport, gymnastics, boule, etc. You know, people will be welcoming if you go and do that, but you'll have to put yourself out to go and do it, and need to be able to travel there, whether that's on a bike or whether you drive. As I say, public transport, if you go rurally, may not be available. If you decide to move into town, obviously depending on the size of the town, if it's a big city, you're going to have the same big city complications that you would have in any big city in the world anywhere, that, you know, people are a little bit more sort of, I'm in my groove going to work, and I'm, you know, I'm going here, I'm going there, and they're not wandering around the streets trying to make friends with you. So again, you would have to put yourself out a little more, but you will have more access to culture. And if you want to work, obviously you would possibly have more access to work if you're in a more urban area. So that's possibly quite a wide-ranging and rambling answer, but, you know, everybody's situation is so very different that it's very difficult to give one fixed answer. For me personally, I live quite rurally. I live with a family. If I didn't live with a family, I would find it really quite boring and I would want to move into town. But lots of people want to just be able to see a donkey out the window and grow some carrots and lettuces, and, you know, and it's a beautiful, peaceful place, and the neighbours are very live and let live. You know, they don't poke their noses in, but if you need them, they are there for you. You know, that you may not speak to them for several months at a go sometime, but if you do ask them for something, they are absolutely there for you. I'll stop now.
Lovely. Okay, thanks, Lisa. I mean, we've had lots of articles in French Property News over the years of single women and men who have moved to France on their own and made a great go of it. You have to be prepared to put yourself out there a little, as Lisa says. And as far as location goes, I think you just really need to think through how you want to spend your time when you're in France and match what you're expecting year round, not just in summer, to be available in that location. So let's move on to a new question. This one is for Tracy. Claire Shilton in the UK would like details on how to retire to France and how much money would be needed. That's quite a vague question. I think she's probably referring to applying for the visa, the money requirements there.
Yeah, I was about to say, it's like how to retire to France. I mean, we need an hour for that because there's lots of steps to go through on preparing to move to France, i.e. reaching out to the HMRC and all of the wonderful things you have to do in the UK to come into France and living in France. So let's focus on the visa type aspect of the move to France. I think you're right, Karen. So if you move into France as a retired person, so obviously I would imagine then in this case, we're talking, Claire, about a visa, you know, the non-working visa. So you need to prepare in advance for that, of course, usually, like I said, just previous 2 to 3 months. The idea would be to start the application from country of origin, so from the UK. If you're based in the UK, 5-step process, application, first of all online. You need to book an appointment with an appropriate TLS centre in the UK, and then you have to consolidate that file and present it. Then you will come to France, validate your visa in France, and then once you're in France validating the visa, it triggers the immigration process behind things, leads to a meeting at the OFI, which is the immigration office. That's the kind of the process how you retire to France from a retirement perspective. From a financial perspective, there is a cost, obviously, from a visa perspective, your appointment costs, you've got your appointment at the visa centre, you've got the appointment when you validate the visa as well. How much money do you need to retire to France? It's quite a bit of an open question because, of course, there's what they call the minimum amount. So that is the SMIC in France. If you've heard of that expression, the SMIC is basically the minimum earnings. So when you retire into France, there's no special figures. They tend to go around the SMIC, which is effectively a net amount of 1,426 euros a month. Gross, it's about 1,800 per adult. So if you're a couple, you can round up to about 2,000 euros a month as a revenue that they will look at. So they look at your bank statements from your country of origin. So if you're applying from, you know, look at your bank statements. They want to look at your pension notifications. If you don't meet the requirements, then they will also look at savings and look if you're a property owner or if you're renting, because if you're a property owner without a mortgage, then it means you've not got a mortgage payment going out or rental fees. So there's quite a different things they will look at from a financial perspective when looking for a visa. It's not just your state pension or your private pension. They can look at other factors as well. And it's about putting that file correctly together to present at the visa centre, so they're not just looking at what your state pension might be, which is usually, if you're a single person, it's underneath the revenue levels, of course. So other aspects come into it. So hopefully from a financial idea, that's giving you an overview, Claire, but of course there are other steps to take into account when moving to France, living in France, and all the different processes you want to go through. Last thing to say on that as well, you might think of, if you're a state pension, like we mentioned earlier, you would have the S1, which will avoid you having to obligatory get private insurance. But Paul, I can see, has joined now, so we'll probably discuss that in a few moments. So if you've got the S1, you don't need to get private insurance, which will save you a couple of €1,000, a few €1,000. But of course, it could still be an option if you might want to get it in case you want to cover yourself anyway.
Lovely, thanks Tracy, and welcome to Paulette. It's great to see you have been able to join us. So we'll pass over an insurance question to you straight away. This one actually isn't about health insurance, although I'm sure we will move on to that later. This question is, when we buy our French property, is insurance legally required? We would want basic buildings insurance, but someone told me we'd need third-party or civil liability insurance in case someone is injured on our property. Is that correct?
So, when you buy a property in France, it's not a legal requirement to insure it, but when you go to sign to buy the property, to sign the act, pretty much every notaire will ask you for an attestation, a certificate to show that the property is insured. Now, included in home insurance in France, there's two different types of like public liability insurance. So you've got public liability insurance as an owner, so that's any damage or injury that your property may cause. But you've also got what's called RCVP, which is Responsibility Civil Vie Privée. And that's any damage or injury that you cause yourself to someone or something. It doesn't make a lot of sense really to somebody, say, coming from the UK. You think, oh, what do I need that for? Insurance in France, say home insurance, is multi-risk. Whereas in the UK, it's all risks. It doesn't matter who caused the problem, who caused the claim, it's just covered. It's not like that in France. It's pretty much, it's on multi-risk. So there's a list of risks, which is like fire, theft, water damage, things like that. If something's damaged, it's who caused the damage. So you claim on that person rather than on your home insurance. So in terms of the responsibility civil as an owner, say for example, there's a storm, a towel flies off your roof and smashes the window of a neighbour's car or damages the car, that's claimed through their car insurance onto your home insurance. And that's the responsibility civil there. As a person, the easiest way to explain the vie privée is to give you an example that happened to me, or my son. So my son was playing football in the garden, managed to kick a football over the garden wall, which hit a passing car, causing a dent in the car. Hooray. But that was fine because that was damage or injury he caused to something or someone, and that was just claimed on the home insurance. It didn't end up going through. They managed to polish it out in the end. But that's a good example to kind of show you that's if you cause damage or injury to someone or something. Now, a football hitting a passing car, a couple of hundred maybe to pull the dent out. But just think, if you cause damage or injury to something else that's a bit bigger than a football going over a wall, hitting a car, that can be thousands. So of course you want to have that cover in place. If you don't want to insure your property, you can actually take the Responsibility Civil Vie Privée cover as a standalone product, and that costs about 60 or 70 euros a year. But generally, a lot of people would prefer to cover their property as well because, there are storms and there are things that happen. So why not protect, you've put a lot of money into buying that property, why not protect it if something happens to it? So there we go, that's the public liability that's included in a home insurance. And you don't have to ask for it, it's standard. It's covered unless it's a second home.
Okay, great. Thanks, Paula. And sorry, I should have said for you to quickly introduce yourself and say who you are because you missed that bit at the beginning.
Yes, so I'm Paulette Booth. I'm the co-founder and director of Agence AXA International, and we're an English-speaking agency covering the whole of France for anyone who wants or needs service in English for all insurance, but you name it, we'll insure it, pretty much.
Great, thanks, Paulette. So let's have a question for Sharon now. Victoria Murchison in the USA says, can I purchase a property with cash?
Yes, you can indeed. You can purchase a property with cash. In fact, if you are a cash buyer, it will actually put you most of the time in a stronger position with regards to the vendors and help you secure the property. And then the good news is then you can put a mortgage on it afterwards. If you would prefer to use the leverage of a mortgage and use your cash to put back in savings or invest elsewhere with a higher yield, you can still purchase as a cash buyer. And therefore, you would need to transfer your funds and show the origin of your funds to the notary to make sure it's not money laundering or anything else. The notary will ask you where the funds come from, and that's one of the things that Jonathan will ask you as well, probably when you're transferring funds via a currency broker. So, provided you can provide the origin of the funds to the notary, then you can purchase cash. And if you decide to, you can put a mortgage on the property in the 6 months following the purchase. That's what we call a post-finance mortgage. And we actually do quite a lot of them for American customers who take money out in retirement and then put it back within a certain amount of time to avoid paying any penalties or taxes. It puts them in a stronger position as a buyer, helps them secure a property in France, and then enables them to use the leverage of a mortgage afterwards. So yes, it is possible, and it's still possible even if you purchase cash instead to get a mortgage.
Lovely, thanks, Sharon. Currency question now for Jonathan. From Mitzi McMahon in the US says, I'm setting up a French bank account in October. Please walk me through currency exchange options.
Okay, thank you. So brilliant. We can help with some French banking contacts if necessary. Sometimes with the French banks in France, you'll need to actually have the acte de vente that we talked about earlier, the closing, the completion having taken place. We do have some contacts who can help get things rolling a little bit earlier. So I'm happy to talk to anyone who may need a French bank, as it's necessary often for your bills and things like that once you've purchased. So in terms of the currency exchange options, I mean, if you're setting up the French bank, I'm assuming this would be for your living costs and things like that. So for each month, you can have what we call a regular payment plan. So you can set up a standing order where you'd send your, for example, well, if you're from the USA, send your dollars in, and then as soon as that money comes in, we'll just automatically pay it out to your French bank account. So that's an automatic trade that just gets set up, and you don't have to worry about it. Each month or each week, or it's as regular as you want it to be. You'll have the money coming into your French bank account, so you're not going to miss any payments. There's more options as well. We can have a more sort of hands-on personal service with that transaction. So let's just say it was $1,000 a month. So we can trade you over the phone if you like and give you a bit of an update on the market, or more sort of hands-off personal service where you can do everything yourself online. And that's certainly quite common for these. $1,000 is a large amount of money, but clearly not as much as for the property transaction itself. So with what we might term slightly smaller sums, maybe 500 euros, you can do it all online yourself, and that's often a lot easier for the client. So we've got quite a few options there that we can offer. That's for your sort of monthly living costs that we can help with, or general costs as things go on. But I did touch earlier on the actual different options that Lumon have, the contract options, and that is the forward contract. You're typically not going to get that with the banks, typically available to retail clients. Banks do offer these forward contracts, but it's normally to businesses. Lumon are able to offer it to all of our clients. And then the limit order, where you're targeting that higher rate if you are hoping the levels are going to improve. Again, that's a contract the bank might offer at a sort of very corporate level to some of their business customers, but you're not typically going to get that type of service from the bank. So just a few considerations for you there, Mitzi, with your French banking options. Yeah, talk to us and we can give you some other things to think about.
That's great. Thanks, Jonathan. There's a lot to cover in a short period of time, isn't it? But as you say, they can get in touch and you can explain it all in much more detail. So a question for Lisa now from Philip Mertens in the UK. What are the rules and powers of a co-prop or syndic? What are the associated costs? So perhaps you can explain what a copropriété or a syndic is.
Yeah. Again, quelle surprise, it's quite a wide-ranging answer. A copropriété can be just 2 or 3 flats or accommodations that have a shared roof or on the same plot of ground, etc. But typically, I suppose we're talking about something like a block of flats. So there might be 40 flats, 100 flats, etc. And obviously, the bigger the property, the more units there are, then the more the copropriété comes into play. The syndic is the management of the copropriété. That can just be a panel of some of the owners who've been elected by the others. You know, they volunteer to do it, or it can be a third-party professional company. Again, if it's a large block of flats, it's more likely that it's going to be a third-party company. In terms of buying into a copropriété, again, it comes back to this transparency thing, because you need to know that it is a copro. At the point of the contract being established, the last 3 years AGM minutes from the Assemblée Générale of the copropriété will be provided to you and looked at. You need to know what the charges are, what the monthly costs are. You know, you cannot enter into the purchase of a property without having been told that the costs are going to be X per month. You know, that's really fundamental information that you need to know. And then another thing that's incredibly important for you to know is whether there are any works plans. So for instance, redoing the facade of a building because of energy efficiency or aesthetics or fire safety, etc. If the whole of the building, even if your flat is on the ground floor, you still have to contribute to the roof that's above the 4th floor apartment. You know, all of the owners of the copropriété have to contribute according to what percentage of the property they are deemed to own, which again would be specified in your title deed, what you own. You might own 41,000th of the block of flats because you've got your flat and you've got a lock-up storage unit and you've got a car parking space, etc. And it will all be very long-windedly written out as to how many tantièmes you actually have acquired in your purchase. But if you are suddenly going to be asked for 15,000 euros, for example, towards the roof or the facade, you do need to have known that from day one. And if you look at the AGM minutes, obviously you can see that the copropriété have been talking about that it's been coming up. You can see whether any of the other owners are in debt to the copropriété, because there might have been some works done. Say there were 40 units of flats in a block, 38 of the people may have paid in good faith and 2 didn't, and so perhaps the copropriété is having to take action against them and chase that money in. And what I would say is 2 things to note: that you're always going to be a freeholder in France. So just because you've bought in a block of flats doesn't mean there's going to be a leasehold in play. You will still be a freeholder as a copropriétaire. And copros are thin on the ground in lots of areas. So again, in rural areas, smaller market towns, smaller towns generally, they're thinner on the ground. Where they are really prevalent is obviously larger cities, Paris, down in the Alps, etc., on the Côte d'Azur, you know, where it's a much more urban area and where apartments are far more commonly available and there are more of them. And those agents there will be very expert in the field of copropriété. So instead of me sort of going into more points now, you know, if you are looking for that kind of property, speak to your agent and make sure that they can furnish you with the monthly running costs, which will include things like the general building insurance, possibly maintenance if it's being done collectively, utilities, etc., and possibly contributions towards big works being collected on an annual basis rather than on an ad hoc, we need to do this now basis. So hopefully that gives an overview.
That's great. Thanks, Lisa. So, question for Tracy now. What's the next big step once we have our visas in place?
Oh, I like that question. So yes, because visas, I mean, you know, obviously we know everything about visas, but we know lots of other things as well. And it's a question I get a lot as well from my clients when we do consultations, because of course the project to move to France is a big one. There's just lots of steps as you go along. And once you've got through the visa, which of course is probably for the majority of you, the biggest step, the next one you want to be looking at once you've got into France, validated your visas and have started setting yourself up, to my mind, will definitely be the healthcare. Affiliation to the French healthcare system is the next big step for a couple of reasons. The first one, and I think, you know, really important, is because the amount of time it takes. And the reason it takes a long time is because you're dealing with the CPAM, which are a big organization and still responsible for affiliation to the healthcare system. So the affiliation process is quite long and arduous, because it's very paperwork oriented. So please, if you need support, make sure you reach out. However, that's one reason it takes a long time. But the reason as well is why it's the second big thing is because when you get to the renewal of your visa, and you will get to that renewal very quickly in your first year in France, round about month 8, one of the documents they request is affiliation to the French healthcare system. Okay, so really you want to be dealing with that. Let's face it, if you don't have an S1, you're going to have to wait till month 3 before you put your application in. So you're already at month 3 of living in France, and at month 8, month 9 at the latest, you want to be applying for your renewal. So the French healthcare process can take a minimum of 6 months to get your social security number. So 2-step process, applying for first, of course, for your social security number, which is access to French health reimbursements, followed by step 2, which is of course getting your famous carte vitale. So that process in itself takes between 6 to 8 months, depending which area of France you're living in, depending what the backlog is looking like. So I advise most of my clients is when we go through a consultation is, okay, let's look at each of the process you go through step by step. And definitely step 2 for me is the healthcare process, because once you then get your social security number, of course, you can then speak with Paulette to get your mutuals in place, because they're very important. They're not obligatory, but highly advised in France. And of course, for us, it's really about making sure that people coming to France are covered for healthcare, because they might come in on private insurance, but that only covers you for obviously emergency care. It's not covering you for, you know, taking care of your health up front, or prevalence as we call it. So we need to get in the healthcare system for that. So hopefully
that's great. Thanks, Tracy. And actually, I'm just going to squeeze in one last question, because it relates to what you are talking about now and what you mentioned earlier. It's for Paulette, and it's do I need a mutual top-up insurance policy? So perhaps Paulette, if you could cover that quite briefly.
Yes. Yeah, I'll try and be brief because it could take an hour to explain, but I'll be really, really quick. So as Tracy said, it's not compulsory. You don't have to have one. But to give you an idea, if you go to see a doctor who's just like a normal doctor, not a consultant who, you know, the top consultant in the country, just a doctor, normal routine doctor's visit, you're going to pay €30. You're going to get back 70% of that from Social Security. So you're going to get back €21 minus €2, which again, that's another webinar to explain the €2. But anyway, so you're going to get €19 back. Okay, so you're €11 out of pocket, that's fine. Just imagine you go into hospital. For example, you go in to have your appendix out. 2 days in hospital. To give you an idea, the average cost of that with a fairly senior consultant would be about €4,000. If you start looking at how much you would then get back for, you've got a daily hospital charge, you've got the consultant's fees, you've got the anaesthetist's fees, you've got medical fees, you might want to have a private room. There's loads and loads of different things in there. If you start looking at what you're going to get back from the state, the 60%, the 70%, things like that, that really starts counting up, adding up. So if you think, I hardly go to the doctors, you can take a mutual that just covers hospitalisation. So it gives you really, really good cover for if you're, admitted to hospital, but it's not going to cover your day-to-day things, your x-rays, your physio and things like that. There's probably about 50 different levels of mutual, and it very much depends on your budget and what's important. Do you wear glasses? Do you need braces and crowns and things like that. It's a very personalised thing. So do you need one? No. Is it advisable to have one? Absolutely. I say, even if you start with just something to cover hospitalisation, because that's really where it can be thousands and thousands. There you go. Hope I kept that short enough.
That was really good. Thanks, Paulette. That was very well explained in a short amount of time. So that does bring us to the end of this webinar. I hope it's been helpful for everyone. The next webinar will be on the 15th of October. You'll receive details by email about how to register for it. And you'll also receive a recording of this webinar, which is really handy if you missed anything or you want to go back and listen to some of the answers again. Apologies, first of all, that we didn't get time to answer all of the questions, and also apologies from Peter that he couldn't join us to discuss tax and financial questions. But all our panelists' details will come up on the screen shortly. Don't hesitate to get in touch with them. They're all really happy to answer your questions and to get in touch with you directly. So thank you again for joining us. I'll just hand over to the panelists to say their farewells too. So Lisa.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Karen, and bonne soirée à tous.
Thank you. And Tracy.
Yes, so hopefully we've answered some of your key questions, but don't hesitate to reach out to us. That's what we're here for, to help you move to France.
And Sharon.
Yep, thanks Karen, thanks to all of the panelists. It's always really informative to listen to you as well, even though I've lived here for ages. Paulette, what you said about Mutuelle resonates with me, especially. I have a family member that's very ill at the moment, and thank goodness that they have a Mutuelle. It's really important, I would just stress that. And when you move to France, do you take expert advice before and plan ahead? It's really important to know what you're getting into and have all of the variables that you're able to plan your move. And I know all of the experts here this evening are fantastic in providing that advice for clients. So thank you all for listening.
That's very good advice. Thanks, Sharon. And Paulette?
Yeah, thanks for listening, everybody. I'm going to say my old motto that I say every time is, you don't know what you don't know. So if you don't know to ask the question, but we know what you don't know. So get in touch. We're here to make the process easier. You know, we all work really well together. We'll get you through it. You can move to France and live the dream.
Thanks, Paula. And Jonathan?
Yes, thank you very much, Karen. Wonderful hosting as always. Thank you very much to all the panelists and the audience for joining us. And yes, just to echo those comments, really, speak to the experts. We're all very friendly, all talking about this day in, day out, and have lived the life. I don't live in France personally, but I've helped thousands of people who do. Of course, the panelists have all been living there many years. So yeah, we're all very happy to talk to you, and thank you for joining us.
So yes, once again, thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you next time. Bye now.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.